The war was almost over, but the fires still burned. In the spring of 1945, Allied bombers had reduced large swaths of Germany to rubble. Factories that once churned out rockets and jet engines lay gutted. Laboratories stood abandoned, their windows blown out, papers soaked and scattered across broken floors. Amid the wreckage of a university in Bonn, an American technician rummaging through the debris discovered a document stuffed inside a toilet water tank. Its pages were hurriedly scrawled with names, specialties, and affiliations, a record never meant to survive the collapse of the Reich. Whoever had hidden it understood exactly what it was worth. As infantry divisions fought street by street in Berlin, another kind of operation was already underway. Allied intelligence teams fanned out across occupied Germany, not to seize land, but to seize knowledge. At Peenemünde, where vengeance weapons had once risen into the night sky, they found shattered launch platforms and abandoned blueprints still spread across drafting tables. In mountain tunnels and sealed bunkers, they uncovered experimental jet engines, guided missile designs, and fragments of research that hinted at weapons far more advanced than anything the Allies had fielded. Everything that could be carried was packed up and shipped west, quietly and quickly, as a new contest began to take shape. Back in Washington, the fighting looked different. In windowless offices, men in dark suits debated how far victory should be allowed to reach. Publicly, the war had a moral clarity. The enemy was defeated. Justice would follow. Privately, there was fear. Fear that if the United States hesitated, the Soviets would not. The question was no longer whether these discoveries mattered, but who would control them. Outside, Americans filled the streets with parades and flags. Families mourned their dead. The war, they believed, was ending. Few suspected that within months, former architects of Germany's most destructive technologies would be living quietly in small towns across Texas and New Mexico, working under new names for a new flag. The choice hanging in the air was simple and deeply unsettling. How much was victory worth after the fighting stopped? The answer would send convoys of buses and trucks winding through the ruins of Europe, carrying men whose loyalties were inconvenient, but whose knowledge was priceless. Their destination was not a courtroom, but a laboratory, and the consequences of that decision would reach far beyond the ashes of Germany, all the way into the sky. In the chaotic final months of World War II, the Allies were not merely fighting battles, they were racing to secure the secrets of German engineering. The Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee, CIOS, composed of British and American technical experts, had been created to scour liberated territories for weapon designs, research data, and the scientists behind them. Their work was urgent because intelligence reports suggested the Soviet Union was undertaking similar raids. In March 1945, an Allied searcher at Bonn University discovered a document later called the Osenberg List, a register of German scientists and engineers conscripted into the Nazi war effort. The list included rocket pioneers, aerodynamicists, chemists, and physicians. Initially, American planners envisioned a small, temporary program dubbed Project Overcast. The idea was to interrogate a few dozen German specialists and use their knowledge to help defeat Japan. But as technicians sifted through laboratories and underground factories, the sheer volume of advanced research, from supersonic aircraft designs to nerve agents, convinced U.S. officials to think bigger. In June 1945, the War Department established the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, JIOA, to oversee recruitment and relocation, President Harry S. Truman signed a directive authorizing the program, but insisted that no committed Nazis or war criminals be hired. The Cold War climate hardened quickly, however, and many within the JIOA argued that ideological purity was a luxury America could not afford if it wished to deny these technologies to Moscow. Names on the Osenberg List soon became targets. Wernher von Braun, the charismatic director of the V-2 rocket program, had been a member of both the Nazi Party and the SS. His work at the Peenemünde Army Research Center had produced more than 3,000 V-2 rockets, which rained terror on British and Belgian cities, killing roughly 9,000 civilians and soldiers. Von Braun and his colleagues had also exploited forced laborers from concentration camps, thousands of whom died in underground factories. Another key figure was Hans Pabst von Ohain, co-inventor of the turbojet engine. Chemist Kurt Blohm, aviation doctor Hubertus Strughold, and engineer Arthur Rudolph had resumes smeared with service to the Third Reich. The moral dilemma of recruiting such men was stark, yet within the JIOA, files detailing SS membership and war crimes were quietly altered or hidden. The transition from plan to action occurred with startling speed. During the summer of 1945, U.S. Army intelligence teams traversed Germany, locating and persuading scientists to cooperate. Many, including von Braun and his 125-strong rocket team, surrendered to American forces in Bavaria. Fearing capture by the Soviets, the scientists struck deals. In exchange for their expertise and safe passage, they would work for the U.S. military. Within weeks, they were transported to shipping depots, flown to the United States under assumed names, and processed at Fort Strong on Boston Harbor. They received bland job titles like War Department Special Employee to mask their pasts. Most of the rocket team ended up at Fort Bliss, Texas, and the nearby White Sands Proving Grounds in New Mexico. There they reassembled captured V-2s, tested them under American supervision, and trained U.S. soldiers to handle the dangerous missiles. Engineers like Arthur Rudolph supervised the construction of test stands and guided missile parts, while von Braun lectured on propulsion and trajectory. In 1950, the group moved to the Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama, forming the core of the U.S. Army's missile development program. Elsewhere, aerodynamicists and jet engine specialists were scattered to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, Wright Field in Dayton, and various universities and contractors. Secrecy surrounded these relocations. Newspapers first revealed the existence of what was then called Operation Paperclip in late 1946. Articles in the New York Times and Newsweek detailed how more than 1,000 Germans had been granted asylum. Critics, including former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, decried the program, arguing that America should not reward men who had served a genocidal regime. Supporters within the military countered that these were the good Germans, engineers forced to serve Hitler, whose knowledge could prevent future wars. Unknown to the public, the JIOA had deliberately scrubbed references to SS memberships and slave labor from personnel files to skirt Truman's directive. Over the next 2 decades, Operation Paperclip reshaped American science and warfare. At the Redstone Arsenal, von Braun's team developed the Redstone and Jupiter rockets, pioneering ballistic missiles capable of carrying nuclear warheads. As the Soviet Union launched Sputnik in 1957, the rocket group, now numbering thousands, helped the U.S. Army launch Explorer 1, America's first satellite. When NASA was formed in 1958, the entire Huntsville operation was transferred to the new agency's Marshall Space Flight Center. Von Braun became its director and chief architect of the Saturn V rocket that eventually lifted Apollo astronauts toward the moon. Elsewhere, jet engine inventor Hans von Ohain worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base on turbofan designs. Chemists from the IG Farben network improved synthetic fuels and plastics. Physiologist Hubertus Strughold conducted research on human tolerance to acceleration and vacuum, earning the sobriquet Father of Space Medicine. Dozens more paperclip scientists blended quietly into universities and corporations, contributing to everything from supersonic flight to meteorology. Yet the program's moral compromises did not remain hidden forever. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, the US government began declassifying paperclip files. Journalists and historians learned that many of the scientists had been more deeply enmeshed in Nazi crimes than previously admitted. Arthur Rudolph, for example, had overseen slave labor at the Mittelwerk underground factory. In 1984, he was forced to renounce his U.S. citizenship and leave the country to avoid prosecution. Evidence emerged that Strughold had sanctioned experiments on concentration camp inmates. These revelations triggered debates about whether the technological gains justified the moral cost. Officially, Operation Paperclip wound down by the early 1960s, but its legacy, both triumphant and troubling, endures. Not everyone accepts the official narrative of Operation Paperclip as a pragmatic wartime bargain. For decades, authors, ufologists, and conspiracy theorists have woven elaborate stories around the program. To understand the power of these narratives, it's important to examine the claims in detail before weighing them against available evidence. For some believers, Paperclip was not merely an act of recruitment, but the seed of a secret Fourth Reich embedded within Western society. They argue that networks of former SS officers, industrialists, and scientists continued to coordinate after the war under organizations like Odessa, an alleged clandestine group that helped Nazis escape to South America. According to this theory, Paperclip served as a cover to place committed Nazis inside the American military-industrial complex, allowing them to influence policy while avoiding accountability. Proponents point to the rapid resurgence of corporations that once funded the Nazi war machine, such as the chemical conglomerate IG Farben, whose successor companies regained global dominance, as evidence that economic power shifted but ideological loyalties remained. These theorists often cite examples that seem, at first glance, to support their claims. They note that Wernher von Braun and his team retained significant autonomy within the US missile program, and that many of them hired other German engineers, creating a microculture within Huntsville that spoke German at work and socialized together. Some authors highlight von Braun's post-war connections to wealthy industrialists and evangelical groups as proof that he leveraged his position to build influence. Fringe writers go further, suggesting that NASA symbols and mission patches contain hidden sigils, hinting at an occult belief system inherited from the SS. However, the Fourth Reich hypothesis extends beyond mere influence. In its most extreme form, it contends that paperclip scientists deliberately steered US strategy to align with fascist principles. Proponents draw parallels between the growth of the American military-industrial complex and the Nazi fusion of industry and state. They argue that secret societies and corporate boards became the new battleground for ideological supremacy, allowing a defeated ideology to resurface under a different flag. To these believers, the moral compromises of Paperclip were not a temporary expedient, but a permanent infection. Another strand of paperclip lore posits that the US government used the program to exploit knowledge of extraterrestrial technology. Supporters of this claim believe that dramatic advances in rocketry, electronics, and metallurgy after 1945 cannot be explained solely by human intellect. They point to the 1947 Roswell incident, in which debris from an object that crashed near Roswell, New Mexico, was initially reported by the Army Air Forces as a flying disc, before officials retracted the statement and said it was a weather balloon. Conspiracy theorists maintain that the debris was actually from an alien spacecraft and that paperclip scientists were sequestered at secure sites like Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to study it. The legend ties this alleged crash to rumors of a Nazi wonder weapon called Die Glock, the Bell. According to obscure wartime testimonies, Die Glock was a secret device built deep in the Owl Mountains of Poland that generated powerful torsion fields and anti-gravity effects. Believers suggest that paperclip engineers, having worked on Die Glock or similar prototypes, were brought to America to replicate its technology. They also reference reports of Foo Fighters, mysterious lights that tailed Allied bombers during the war, and claim these were prototypes of advanced aircraft far beyond the V-2. To them, the sudden appearance of disc-shaped craft in post-war UFO sightings indicates that paperclip scientists were testing otherworldly propulsion systems. Further fueling this theory are anecdotes about scientists being sequestered at bases like Fort Belvoir and Los Alamos, where top-secret nuclear and aerospace research occurred. Some authors allege that by combining captured German innovations with crashed saucer components, the US rapidly developed stealth coatings, fiber optics, and transistors decades ahead of public disclosure. While mainstream historians attribute these breakthroughs to incremental research at institutions like Bell Laboratories, believers remain convinced that paperclip opened the door to reverse-engineered alien technology. Perhaps the most grounded of the conspiracy claims revolves around the suppression of Nazi war crimes and the continuation of unethical experiments. It is undeniable that many paperclip recruits had tainted pasts. Hubertus Strughold, later celebrated as the father of space medicine, oversaw research at the Aviation Medical Research Institute in Berlin, where victims were subjected to hypothermia and high-altitude tests. Kurt Blohm, a high-ranking scientist in the Reich Research Council, conducted plague and poison experiments on concentration camp prisoners. Arthur Rudolph managed production at the subterranean Mittelwerk, V2 factory, where an estimated 20,000 forced laborers died from starvation, beatings, and accidents. Critics argue that bringing such men to America amounted to a tacit endorsement of their crimes. They point out that some paperclip scientists received generous salaries, comfortable housing, and eventual U.S. citizenship, while their victims received no justice. There are allegations that data from Nazi human experiments were quietly incorporated into U.S. research programs, and that certain scientists continued ethically dubious work under new auspices. For example, believers claim that Strughold's research informed high-altitude tests at Brooks Air Force Base in Texas, and that Rudolph's production methods influenced labor practices in later rocket programs. This claim expands to suggest that paperclip served as a pipeline, bringing not just rocket engineers, but also specialists in chemical warfare and biological agents into U.S. black projects. Some cite the later emergence of Project MK-Ultra, the CIA's mind control program, as evidence that the government was willing to sanction human experimentation. They speculate that knowledge gleaned from paperclip recruits in fields like anesthesia and psychopharmacology fed into such clandestine research. In this view, the program didn't simply save war criminals, it allowed them to continue their work under a different flag. Paperclip believers weave these claims into a cohesive narrative, a secret Nazi network, hidden technologies from beyond Earth, and a government willing to sweep atrocities under the rug. To evaluate these assertions, we must now turn to the other side of the debate, those who argue that the truth, while complex, is far less fantastical. Skeptics acknowledge that Operation Paperclip was morally fraught, but they contend that many conspiracy claims collapse under scrutiny. They focus on documented history, declassified files, and the geopolitical context of the late 1940s and 1950s. Their rebuttals emphasize mundane explanations over hidden cabals and alien craft. Supporters of the official account argue that Operation Paperclip was a response to a rapidly changing geopolitical reality rather than a covert ideological project. In 1945, the alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union collapsed with remarkable speed. Within months of Germany's surrender, the Soviets launched Operation Paperclip, forcibly relocating more than 2,000 German scientists and engineers to rebuild Soviet military and industrial capacity. American intelligence officials believed that failing to act would leave critical expertise in the hands of a future adversary. In that context, Paperclip was framed as a defensive measure, not a political endorsement. Skeptics emphasize that many of the scientists recruited were career opportunists rather than committed ideologues. Party membership, they argue, was often a prerequisite for advancement in the Third Reich's research institutions. While this does not absolve individuals of moral responsibility, it complicates claims that Paperclip imported a unified post-war Nazi command structure into American institutions. Despite decades of investigation, no credible evidence has emerged of centralized coordination, ideological planning, or covert Nazi networks directing U.S. policy from within the military-industrial complex. Social clustering among German engineers, such as the close-knit community that formed in Huntsville, is better explained by language, familiarity, and shared professional backgrounds than by secret allegiance. This perspective also places Paperclip within a broader Western pattern. In post-war West Germany, former party members and SS affiliates re-entered industry, academia, and government as part of national reconstruction. Similar compromises occurred across Europe as Cold War priorities eclipsed denazification efforts. From this view, Paperclip was not an exceptional conspiracy, but one example of a wider, deeply uncomfortable accommodation made by multiple nations navigating a new global standoff. Critics of the conspiracy theories point out that some measure of accountability eventually arrived. In the 1980s, the U.S. government declassified thousands of Paperclip documents, revealing previously hidden Nazi affiliations. Investigative journalists and the U.S. Department of Justice's Office of Special Investigations began reviewing the backgrounds of naturalized scientists. When evidence of war crimes emerged, individuals faced consequences. Arthur Rudolph, for example, renounced his citizenship in 1984 and returned to Germany to avoid being tried for his role at Mittelwerk. Although he was not prosecuted, his case signaled a willingness to revisit Paperclip's moral compromises. Hubertus Strughold, once lionized, saw his name removed from an Aerospace Medicine Award after activists highlighted his wartime activities. Furthermore, not all scientists recruited under Paperclip avoided scrutiny. Kurt Blom was tried at the Nuremberg doctors' trial and acquitted. He was subsequently blocked from immigrating to the United States. Others, such as SS physician Dr. Sigmund Rascher, were executed or imprisoned before they could be recruited. These examples demonstrate that Paperclip did not provide blanket immunity for all Nazi scientists. They also show that some contemporary checks existed, even if they were imperfect. Skeptical historians argue that the technological advances often attributed to hidden programs or extraterrestrial influence can be explained through documented research trajectories already underway before Paperclip began. American rocketry did not start with German engineers. Institutions such as the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Aerojet, and Reaction Motors were already developing liquid fuel engines and experimental aircraft during the war. Programs like the WAC Corporal and Aerobee-sounding rockets predated the arrival of German specialists. Paperclip accelerated existing work, but it did not introduce unknown physics or radically new principles. Claims surrounding alien technology, Nazi anti-gravity devices, and sudden scientific leaps are also challenged on evidentiary grounds. The story of Die Glock rests on a single late source with no supporting documentation, no recovered hardware, and no corroboration from wartime records. Reports of Foo Fighters are consistently explained as atmospheric phenomena, misidentified aircraft, or optical effects common in night flying. As for Roswell, declassified Air Force material shows that the debris originated from Project Mogul, a classified balloon program designed to detect Soviet nuclear tests. Secrecy surrounding Mogul, skeptics argue, created the vacuum in which UFO mythology flourished. Skeptics also push back against the idea that unethical US programs require Nazi influence to explain their existence. Projects involving human experimentation and secrecy, including later Cold War intelligence initiatives, arose from American institutional dynamics, wartime precedent, and internal ethical failures. While Paperclip undeniably involved moral compromise, there is no evidence that it served as a prerequisite pipeline for such programs, or that alien technology played any role in their development. Extraordinary claims, skeptics maintain, demand extraordinary proof, and in this case, none has surfaced. In the skeptical view, Operation Paperclip was a morally ambiguous but ultimately pragmatic program. It helped America counter Soviet advances and contributed to space exploration, but its ethical compromises were later acknowledged. The conspiracy theories, they argue, reflect a fascination with hidden agendas more than a reflection of the historical record. Beyond established facts and contested claims, the story of Operation Paperclip invites deeper reflection. The following theories range from speculative to allegorical, each offering a different lens through which to view the program's legacy. One theory suggests that Operation Paperclip was part of a larger cosmic bargain. In this speculative scenario, Allied leaders became aware of extraterrestrial visitors during or immediately after the war. Seeking a technological edge, they offered safe haven to German scientists who had experimented with breakthrough propulsion and perhaps glimpsed alien technology. In return, the scientists would decode recovered craft and integrate their physics into earthly weapons. Proponents link this idea to rumors that Los Alamos and Wright-Patterson housed alien artifacts. They argue that advances in radar, microelectronics, and stealth coatings in the 1950s and 1960s came too quickly to be entirely homegrown. Exploring this theory requires suspending disbelief and entertaining a universe teeming with life. What ethical compromises would a government make to obtain unearthly knowledge? If a cosmic bargain were struck, it would fundamentally redefine notions of sovereignty and scientific progress. The story becomes less about Nazis and more about humanity's place in a wider cosmos. Even if untrue, this thought experiment illustrates how easily the unknown invites conspiracies. This second theory is less sensational, but perhaps more sobering. It contends that Operation Paperclip epitomizes an ethical sliding scale. When survival is at stake, moral absolutes become negotiable. This view doesn't postulate hidden cabals, but instead interrogates the logic of utilitarian decision-making. If recruiting former Nazis hastened the defeat of Japan or prevented Soviet domination, was the trade-off justified? Could denying their expertise have cost more lives in a hypothetical nuclear exchange? The ethical sliding scale theory frames Paperclip as one of many historical examples. Alongside the bombing of Hiroshima, the Tuskegee experiment, or MK Ultra, in which the US government weighed human rights against perceived national security. By wrestling with this theory, viewers confront uncomfortable questions about their own values. It forces a reckoning with the idea that good outcomes can emerge from unethical actions, and asks whether ends can ever truly justify means. It also invites comparisons to modern debates about recruiting foreign hackers for cyber warfare or granting asylum to defectors with bloody pasts. The lesson, perhaps, is that societies must establish clearer ethical boundaries before crises force impossible choices. The final theory suggests that the enduring mystique of Operation Paperclip says as much about us as it does about history. Humans are pattern-seeking storytellers. We gravitate toward narratives that simplify complex events into archetypes of heroes, villains, and secret plots. Paperclip combines easily recognizable tropes: Nazis, rockets, flying saucers, cover-ups. It is unsurprising that decades after the documents were declassified, new generations attach fantastical elements to the story. Conspiracy theories, in this interpretation, are modern folklore, cautionary tales that help communities process anxiety about power, secrecy, and technology. This perspective does not dismiss the real ethical problems of Paperclip. Rather, it frames the program as a canvas onto which people project fears about government overreach, corporate domination, and the consequences of war. Myth-making allows a society to debate these issues in allegorical form. The stories persist because they evolve with each retelling, absorbing contemporary concerns. In this sense, Paperclip becomes not just a historical episode, but a living narrative that reflects our collective conscience. These theories invite us to question official histories and imagine alternative possibilities. Some remain within the bounds of plausibility. Others veer into speculative fiction. All of them, however, underscore the powerful legacy of Operation Paperclip and the human tendency to search for meaning in the shadows. Operation Paperclip occupies a strange place in the American story. It is simultaneously a tale of scientific triumph and a record of moral compromise. Without the expertise of Wernher von Braun and his colleagues, the United States might have fallen behind in the race to develop ballistic missiles and explore space. Yet in bringing these men to America, the government ignored or suppressed their complicity in wartime atrocities. The decision reminds us that nations are often built on uneasy bargains. As we close this episode, consider how the legacy of Paperclip reverberates today. We live in a world shaped by technologies that sprang from Cold War competition, from rockets that launch satellites to jet engines that shrink the globe. Many of these advances emerged through alliances with former enemies. At the same time, debates over accountability, historical memory, and the limits of secrecy continue. Should the sins of the past forever preclude participation in the future? Or is redemption possible when knowledge is put to peaceful use? The story of Operation Paperclip offers no easy answers. It is a mirror reflecting our own willingness to compromise when confronted with existential threats. How we interpret it may reveal more about our values than about the people who crossed the Atlantic under its banner. We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Was Paperclip a necessary evil or a betrayal of justice that haunts us still? If you enjoyed, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It helps the channel grow, and it means I can keep bringing you stories that challenge the way we see history and reality.